If I could only recommend one book for every psychodynamic psychotherapist in training to read, this would be it. This is the one book I consult pretty much every month, and it's the only book so far that I've rated 10 out of 10. And it's all about psychoanalytic diagnosis. I know it doesn't sound super catchy and interesting, but my plan is that by the end of this video, you will rush to click the link in the description box below to get this book. And hopefully, maybe you'll think fondly of me when it becomes your trusted companion through the treacherous waters of being in training or an early psychotherapist. So let me show you why this book by Nancy McWilliams is a masterpiece, what you'll learn from it, and why it needs to be on your must-read list for this year. If you are a psychotherapist in training, you hope to help people. And in order to be helpful, you and your patient need to understand what is the problem? What is going on? Why does the patient suffer? And that is what diagnosis is all about. We need to understand what's wrong. And now, so far, you're likely familiar with either the DSM or the ICD. Here in Germany, we use the ICD. So you're familiar with those kind of diagnoses based on those manuals. And if you hope to provide psychodynamic psychotherapy, that is an issue because, yes, of course, the DSM, the ICD, they have their place, they have their useful application and so on, but they diagnose based on observable symptoms. If you diagnose someone with a depression, that doesn't tell you anything about how exactly they got depressed or why they are depressed. So it doesn't really inform your treatment very much. You can have two people that come in with a diagnosis of a depression, and the underlying factors and the treatment plan that you develop is totally different. And I mean, even with something like the ICD, you can have two people who are diagnosed with a depression who maybe don't even share one symptom. So let alone, the underlying subjective experiences. The metaphor that's often used is if someone gets referred to you with a depression as a psychotherapist in training, it's the same as if a doctor gets a referral where it says, patient has a fever. Fever, just like depression, means there's something wrong, but no doctor would simply say, oh, well, we just try to lower the fever and that's it. No, a doctor would want to know exactly why the fever is there in the first place, what caused the fever. And similarly, a psychotherapist, or in this case, particularly a psychodynamic psychotherapist or psychoanalyst, would also want to understand why exactly did that person have to develop a depression. Psychoanalytic diagnosis, especially the way Nancy McWilliams lays it out in this beautiful book, is all about understanding personality structure, understanding the inner subjective experiences of the self, of emotions, of other people, relational patterns, defenses, and the like. So as I said, this book is called Psychoanalytic Diagnosis by Nancy McWilliams with the subtitle Understanding Personality Structure in the Clinical Process. It was published in 1994 and has 426 pages. And by the way, hi, if we haven't met yet, my name is Alina. I'm a German psychoanalyst in training. And yeah, I love to read. On this channel, I introduce you to interesting books I read, interesting theories I discover and try to make accessible. And if you're also into psychoanalytic literature, you might be very interested to get my psychoanalytic library. This is a database I compiled in Notion with all the books I ever read whenever I can, with notes. I unfortunately don't have my notes about psychoanalytic diagnosis in there, but of tons of other books. So if that's interesting for you, feel free to sign up to my email list, and I'm going to send my psychodynamic library your way so that you can check out all my favorite books with notes where possible and find your next favorite read. I always like to go through the contents of the book because I think it gives a very good overview of what this book is about. And usually if I like the content list, then I decide to buy the book or not. So let's look at this content of this book. The first thing Nancy McWilliams dives into is why diagnose. She goes into much more details about the difference between diagnosing based on the DSM and the ICD versus psychoanalytic diagnosis. Then the second chapter is about psychoanalytic character diagnosis. And here she goes through all the schools of psychoanalysis, ranging from Freud's metapsychology to ego psychology, object relations theory, contemporary relational movements, each with a focus specifically to how they understand character formation. And, already for this bit, it's a great summary. It's a wonderful way to freshen up your knowledge about those different schools within psychoanalysis, especially when it comes to their focus on character formation. Then in the third chapter, called Developmental Levels of Personality Organization. Hello, editing Alina here. I have to quickly jump in to save filming Alina from confusing all of us. Basically, what chapter 3 introduces us to is assessing the overall health of personality, or the level of pathology, ranging from neurotic, which is pretty much healthy, to borderline, and then psychotic, which is very disturbed. I've known this as Canbeck's borderline personality organization. To understand personality structure, we want to first answer the question, how healthy or disturbed is the personality? This is what chapter 3 is about. And then we want to answer the question, in what particular way is the personality functioning or disturbed? And this is what part 2 of the book, which is chapters 7 to 15, is about, with the introduction of different personality types. Let's get back. In the next chapter, she ventures into what are the implication of this, those 3 different levels of organization. So basically, she tries to answer the question, how is your treatment impacted by whether you work with someone in the neurotic range, in the borderline range, or in the psychotic range? And what I love about Nancy McWilliams is that she is not vague. I've read so many books where they make very elaborate and very interesting statements, but I would have no idea how that would actually translate into practice. And Nancy McWilliams really gives you exact sentences and differences in intervention, depending on who you work with. For example, Nancy McWilliams writes, a woman in the neurotic range may be gushing about a friend with whom she is in a somewhat competitive situation in a way that suggests she is not in touch with any negative affects. The therapist may say something along the lines of, but you'd also like to kill her. Or a man may be going on about how independent and free-spirited he is. The therapist may comment, and yet you're always worried about what I think of you. But borderline clients to whom one talks this way will feel criticized and diminished, because unless a statement is phrased differently, the main message that will be received is, you're utterly wrong about what you feel. This response derives from their tendency to be in one or another self-state, rather than in a frame of mind that can experience and tolerate ambivalence and ambiguity. So one would have a better chance of being heard as empathic if one said, I can see how much Mary means to you. Is it possible, though, that there is also a part of you, a part that you would not act upon, of course, that would like to get rid of her because she's in some ways in competition with you? Or you certainly have established that you have a very independent, self-reliant streak. It's interesting that it seems to coexist with some opposing tendencies, like a sensitivity to what I think of you. This is just an example, but you will find many of those small clinical vignettes of those small clinical interventions, and I always find it so helpful to really have someone translate the theory into practice and if ever possible into sentences for me. In the next 2 chapters of the book, which is the end of part 1, Nancy McWilliams describes both primary and secondary defensive processes. If you work psychoanalytically, it's always important to be familiar with different defensive processes, and Nancy McWilliams does a great job at introducing you to all the different defenses. I've made a video myself about defense mechanisms. I'm going to link that below if you want to check it out. But yeah, in this book you will find a great collection and summary of possible defensive processes that you might encounter in your clinical practice. And then that brings us to my favorite part of this book, because in this second part of the book, Nancy McWilliams lays out 9 different personality structures, personality styles, personality trends, personality disorders, depending on the severity. So in this part of the book, you will get a detailed overview of psychopathic or antisocial personalities, narcissistic, schizoid, paranoid, depressive and manic, masochistic, self-defeating personalities, obsessive and compulsive personalities, hysterical, histrionic, and dissociative personalities. And for each of those personality structures, Nancy McWilliams goes through, first of all, what the situation of the drive, leading affect, and temperament is in this personality style, then their signature defensive and adaptive processes, the relational patterns, how they experience their self, transference and countertransference that you're likely to encounter with this sort of personality style, the therapeutic implications, differential diagnosis, a summary, and always, in the end, suggestions for further reading. This is a gold mine. It really is a gold mine. I have never read something that was at the same time so helpful and clear. This is, I don't know how Nancy McWilliams does it, but her way of writing and of presenting this material is just so nuanced, so kind and empathic, and yet clear, very well organized, and just a masterpiece. I can't say it any other way. If you read this book, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. I used a lot of Nancy McWilliams' writing about the paranoid personality style to complete my case study on Dwight Schrute from The Office, who I thought was a good dramatized and, of course, a bit over the top example of a paranoid personality. So in case that's interesting to you, I can link that video below. And of course, what we need to keep in mind when we talk about any sort of diagnosis is that it's not about putting people into neat boxes. You know, humans didn't first define different kinds of birds, and then birds developed fitting exactly into, like, neatly into those categories. Birds developed in their own way through whatever evolutionary mechanism. And then we try to find similarities and categorize them to understand, what we see. And of course, this is a bit of a difficult comparison, but in a way, no diagnostic system will ever neatly capture and precisely differentiate the complexity of the human unconscious mind. So the point of reading this book is not to put people into boxes, not objectify them, or even worse, abuse this very precious understanding of psychodynamics to look down on others or distance yourself from common sense. The point is to get familiar with psychodynamic thinking, learning to empathize with very subjective inner experiences. And you'll walk away from this book knowing the difference between, among many things, analytic and interjective depression, and how the treatment is vastly different, between anxiety that is spurred by separation or fear of annihilation. You'll understand the dynamics of the narcissistic self, schizoid defenses, hysteric transferences, and your countertransference reaction. There's so much to get from this book. It doesn't mean that in your clinical practice you will encounter the prototypes of those described personality styles or personality structures, and all then you have to do is take Nancy McWilliams' book, look in the section, and then be able to help anyone. That's not the case. If you ask, will this book help me understand every patient? The answer is no. And it will also not help you to understand everything that could ever come up in therapy. No, of course not. But I think this is a great way to start. And you will walk away from this book with a very solid understanding of different personality styles, defense mechanisms, relational patterns, transference and countertransference that you might expect. And it just introduces you to psychodynamic thinking in the most beautiful way, which is why I have loved this book so much and still love it so much. And keep it close to me at all times. So I hope I could convince you to give this book a go. I want to thank you so much for the time you spent with me and the attention you've given me in this video. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.